Our next presentation. So we are really excited to introduce this next panel. So this is an agronomist panel talking about the balancing act of canola variety selection, which I know everyone has been battling. I want to first introduce our moderator for the session this morning, Sonia Wilson. So Sonia is the Manitoba Agriculture Oilseeds Specialist. She completed her undergrad with a focus on plant biotechnology at the University of Manitoba. She also has worked on a research project focused on canola tolerance, excess moisture stress, before covering a term role as research manager back in canola growers. So you're very familiar with Sonia here at NCGA. And then our three panelists that we have today, starting with Brunel Sabourin. So Brunel is the owner of Antara Agronomy. He's been a trusted advisor to growers for almost 30 years. Growing up a farm in the Red River Valley, Brunel develops a deep passion for agriculture and brings a wealth of practical hands-on experience to his consulting work. Brunel understands economic and agronomic factors that go into selecting winning crop varieties and maximizing the potential. So our second panelist in the middle is Breanna Miller-Friesen. Breanna Miller-Friesen is an agronomy specialist with the Canola Council of Canada. She's based out of Portage, Manitoba. She covers southeastern Manitoba as kind of her territory with the canola growers. She grew up on a grain farm in Oakville, Manitoba, graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and Agribusiness at the University of Manitoba, and later went on to obtain her CCA designation as well as work as an agronomist at Fatteicher Sales. This is making her well-versed in both science and business of agriculture. And then our third panelist today is Fatteicher, along with her husband Miles and a fantastic team of agronomists. They operate 360 Ag Consulting in the Parkland region. Based out of Brunel, Manitoba, 2025 will be their 19th crop year of working with producers constantly striving to improve agronomic practices and maximize their business potential. 360's focus is creating the best fertility plans possible through a highly intensive variable rate and scaling program. So with that, if we can get the slide with the QR code to stay on. So for this panel, we're going to be using Slido. So if anybody with their phones, the way we're going to take questions from the audience as well as we're going to run a few audience polls is just this QR code will stay up during the panel. And I'll be monitoring it for questions, but if you go up on the very top, there'll be a polls and as well as a Q&A. So if you have a question that pops up at any time throughout the panel, feel free to throw it under the Q&A. And then if there's a question in there that you really like that somebody else put on there, you can just like it or upvote it. And then questions that kind of have the most interest are ones that we'll prioritize getting to at the end. And then as the polls come up throughout the panel, if you just click the polls at the top and throw in your vote, and then we can show the results as we get to it throughout the panel. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sonia and then let you guys talk about varieties.
Awesome, thanks so much, Aim. So really excited to get into this discussion, or a bit shorter here. So we're gonna start off, we have Brunel, Breanna, and Karen here, and we're gonna start off with just running through, you're in different areas of the province. How are you approaching the choosing a variety discussion with your growers? Maybe can you walk us through an example? So I'll go Sister Cornell here.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for asking me to be part of the panel. So there's three things I think when I talk to growers in choosing canola varieties that we consider. So where we are in the Red River Valley, we're south of Winnipeg in a floodplain, and a big problem for us first and foremost is herbicide resistance. So especially this last couple of years, we've been dealing with the weed called water hemp, but we've also got herbicide resistance to weeds like kochia, lady stum. So we want a herbicide tolerant system that is going to match the weed spectrum in the field. And then after that, the thing that we take into consideration is also what planting equipment the farmer has. So we're in an area that has a lot of planters. A lot of people have justified buying planters to put canola seed down. So it's another consideration, and I say that in terms of row spacing because these planters for canola typically of 15 to 20 inches in row spacing. So that becomes a problem for two things. Number one, again, is weed competition. when it comes to weeds like water hemp, we want to cover the ground as fast as we can and shade it out to keep these weeds from even germinating. But the next thing is also harvest. So what are the practices for harvest? These wider row spacings are not as conducive to swapping canola. So if the farmer wants to swap about a canola, that is another thing that we have to consider is the row spacing as well. So depending on the varieties, if that's the case, we want a variety that has very good shatter or quad shatter resistance. Not all varieties are created equal, but those are the three basic things that we start for when we're right off the hop to choosing a variety.
And maybe I'll turn the question over to Karen as well, just being in a very different region. Like, what does a typical conversation look like?
So I guess I like to do it on a farm by farm basis, so kind of review with the farmer what worked well and what didn't for them. Obviously, one of the first places we start is yield, but then we need to look at where we are. And up in Roblin, one of the most important things after yield I'm looking for is early season vigor. We have lots of challenges. Even our best growers, their seeding equipment costs are dialed in. They have to drive. So lots of times the canola is not going into great soil conditions. Sometimes they're muddying it in. Sometimes it's going into cold ground. Sometimes it's hitting dry ground and wet ground. We've had severe flea beetle infestations when your agronomist calls and says it's biblical. That's fairly serious. We need varieties that are going to get up and go. And the other thing is frost. In the parkland, we've got a lot of cold conditions. So that's what I'm looking at firstly. And then we're looking at weeds. What kind of, Brunel said they have the water hemp. We have a lot of group 1 and 2 resistant weed issues up in our area. And we also have not a lot of bees in our rotation. So that opens the door for a lot of glyphosate resistant varieties as well as clear fields. Another thing in our area, we have 3 crush plants within an hour of us. That opens the door to a lot of identity preserved systems that we can grow. And in those weed challenges, I guess the last thing we look at is what are we doing to give that variety the best start so it can have the best get up and go. So picking the proper chemicals, if there's anything we can do in terms of soil active, herbicides, just whatever's going to fit on that farm, making sure we're teeing it up to have the best start.
Well, thank you. So now, evidently different farm size operations, etc. Are you finding that the variety choices are vary across farms? It's heavy on size, different things like that as well? Or is this, pretty the conversation you'll go through with most farms? Maybe I'll go back to Brunel here. Yeah, you want to get Sure, Breanna.
Oh, okay. So I'm not currently in the retail role at this point in time. Kind of moved with my role with Mill Council, so not doing this, firsthand this past season, but previously would find, we had similar issues in our similar geographic areas, so similar herbicide issues, weed issues. But it is definitely like a farm by farm situation. Every farmer has their different, maybe their different columns we're trying to find a solution to. We have to kind of dial in to find that right variety, find that right fit for them. As you mentioned, there's some fields that are always the last field to get seeded is a little later, it dries up a little later, so that might be our shorter maturity. That one farm might be different farms have different issues, but I do find, we did have a lot of maybe fan favorites that were consistent in the area that were fairly popular, but definitely varied farm by farm.
Okay. And just a reminder, the Slido question is up right now about what region of the province you're from. So how often are you finding that farmers are actually changing up the varieties that they're growing? Is that something that's coming up more? What does that kind of look like? I'll go to Brunel here.
We find that most of our growers are between 2 to 4 different varieties in a year. They'll have their 1 or 2 favorites, and then they're always trying a newer variety just to see what's new up and coming. If we actually look at their benchmarking data, I think our average is 2.4 varieties per farm in a growing season. So 2 to 3 would be the amount of times. And as far as changing them up, that can depend. Some it's kind of 50-50. If a newer variety comes along that does perform better, they'll definitely switch to that one. But sometimes it's a case of their tried and true favorite is taken out of the market, so they don't have a choice but to upgrade to different varieties.
Yeah. So, Breanna, where are you seeing in the farm?
Yeah, very similar to Brunel here. So we find most farmers are going through 2 to 4 varieties, I guess is a good measure. And same thing over time, maybe phasing out for different reasons. Maybe there's a better replacement for disease package, better variety options. Maybe phasing out some of their older, trying new varieties and something new. But it's never, a big jump, a big switch. It's usually like producing that new variety farm, see how it behaves on their lands in their situation, and then maybe find that shift of acres going more towards that variety over time. So it was never big dramatic changes. It was kind of a slow 2 to 3 year cycle at least for varieties, but very similar.
I'll go here to Heron. So what are some of the, when farmers are looking at making a change, I think Breanna mentioned a couple here, but what are some of the factors that are driving that decision, some of the challenge that they're experiencing to, look at potentially changing some varieties there?
Well, it's probably more than a couple of years ago, probably 4 years ago, in fall while we were doing our SWAT timing or pre-harvest timing, for the producers we were scouting for, we noticed that 2 totally different systems, but 2 cornerstone varieties that guys had been using and were very widely used across our district, there was lots and lots of disease in them. And the growers had done everything at that point that they could to prevent it. So when we think see things like that happening, it's a very large signal for us to switch out those varieties. And I guess I have a lot of faith in that the seed companies are moving the needle in their disease packages. So guys like the height, the ease of harvestability, be it club root, be any of the attributes in that line that they're using, that they move up, that the disease package is increasing as well.
And what about in the Red River, Brunel, are you seeing what are some of the key drivers there?
Probably will echo a lot of what Karen said, or driving it, the disease. But there are still, I got myself caught a couple of years ago where a farmer had a variety, and I made the assumption that sclerotinia, the disease ratings for all new varieties were as good as the old ones, and it was a drier year, so we made the call at the time not to spray. We did have a low level of sclerotinia disease in there, and sure enough, after I checked the guide, it wasn't as high a rating as some of our standards. So there is still differences, and we do need to pay attention to those.
Yeah, and what about Breanna? I guess what are you seeing? You're kind of having a agronomy background, but also working at the full province now. What are you seeing as some of the changing drivers here?
Changing drivers, yeah. Same with the retail background is, we had a problem we ran into one year. That kind of, growers are quick to be, let's maybe make an adjustment, not to say drop the variety and move on, but if there was a problem we felt we would look for a new solution. Yeah, and also, just positive word of mouth too, in the positive light, we're seeing a neighbor, a trusted farmer that, we respect their opinion, had a great result, a beautiful field all season long, it yielded the way they expected. Growers were also interested in trying those varieties as well, so it could be in a positive light as well, but yeah, definitely seeing more, the disease focus right now in my role too, kind of trying to shift to chase a better disease package has been a big game changer. So.
Okay, and so that as well, there's a Slido question up right now. We're going to dig into some of the traits. So that on the poll is, what are the most important characteristics of a canola variety that you consider when someone deciding to grow them on your farm? So let's head into looking at some of these trade-offs between varieties. You mentioned disease packages, etc. Knowing that there are always trade-offs, so you could have variety with the best disease package or best quad shatter but might not have the highest yield rate, maybe in comparison to past field trials. How are you taking this into consideration when you're helping a farmer through a variety decision? And maybe I'll switch our order and go over to Karen first here.
Well, I think it's important to be very resourceful and nimble and know your farm when you're choosing these varieties. If you want to grow something and it doesn't have the best disease package, you better not be putting it on canola. Is it canola on canola? Or, you know, go out to your fields that are 1 and 3, 1 and 4. In terms of yield, obviously we all want the best yield, but if there's a variety that you want to grow that you can pencil out that maybe isn't the best yielder, see where you're putting it. If you're taking over a farm from your neighbor who knew he was letting it go and drew his phos levels down to 2 parts per million, it doesn't matter what genetics you put on there, your limiting factor is going to be your nutrients. So, and in that regard, weeds too. Line your herbicide package with the weeds you have on the fields. I guess one last thing that I warn producers is I was having a drink with a friend the other night. She's a farmer, and I said, "What kind of canola do you grow?" And she said the cheapest. And I guess don't let price dictate what variety you grow. If somebody's trying to sell you something that's on the shelf, it's on the shelf for a reason, and you will not grow yourself into prosperity by saving on seed costs. Keep moving the needle on your varieties.
Yeah, Breanna, what are your thoughts on some of those trade-offs?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, again, finding what is our problem we're trying to solve, what's the solution we're looking for. If our issue is disease, say we have clubbered issue, definitely the trade-off, for a couple bushels of yield potentially versus a clubbered, infestation, I don't know if the right word is for that. Definitely that makes our decision a lot easier. It's definitely worth that yield potential loss versus say something with a weed resistance issue, herbicide package. We have a lot more options to choose from that might still be top yielding varieties. So just going back to that limiting factor, what is our problem, and overall, I guess, what are the risks associated with not chasing that problem and fixing it versus chasing that higher yield potential?
Yeah, and I'll just, in case, if you're doing the Slido, you'll see the results, and if you're not, we had the polling results here, 90% said yield, and I think the next is pod shatter there in terms of the importance. So Brunel, what about you? What are some of the trade-offs and thoughts through as you work with farmers?
For us, probably the biggest one, probably the echo to slide yield-wise. We have a lot of growers that would like to chase, when we look at canolas, like the specialty canola oils that often have a premium attached. We need to ask ourselves, is the juice worth the squeeze sometimes? If it's a compromise to grow that variety, but we end up with a weed problem that'll last for 10 years and cost us X number more in herbicide cost, or limit the amount of crops that we can grow because we have these weeds, is it worth the squeeze? But we've also got, we're big fans or big promoters of doing your own on-farm testing. And we had an example of that this year. We had a grower that had a newer variety, same herbicide tolerance group, but it was a specialty oil, and he wanted to grow it against what he traditionally grows. So this was a properly replicated trial 6 times across the field, and it was a good 10 bushels across each strip difference in the yield. Now, no amount of premium is going to make up that difference for this grower. So it's something that we definitely need to do and keep in consideration.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so just some of those results here, we had yield is sitting at 89% being most important, pod shatter 80%, and then black leg 34 maturity, and then sclerotinia there. Okay, so can you give, and maybe I'll start from Brunel here first, but can you give an example of when a farmer may have benefited from choosing a different variety choice? Maybe had that discussion and why they may have not made that decision when making their original choice.
Probably the last example that I just gave, but it's more of a question of when we're doing the on-farm trials, it's not just what should we be doing, it's what shouldn't we be doing. So in this case, it just went to confirm that we were doing the right thing. We still learn from this. It's not a failure because we didn't find what we were looking for, but it's something that we confirm that we're on the right track or agreed the right practice.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just talk a bit more about, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of data out there. what are some of the key resources that you lean on or tend to pull from or think are valuable when you are looking at making variety choices and keeping up with all the new varieties that come on the market? Like how you kind of wade through everything. I'll start over with Karen.
Well, I guess the number one thing I look at is I love when retail and seed companies do trials. Everything is treated the same. It's the same drill, the same fertility, the same crop rotation, the same fertility, seed bed utilization, one grower. So I like that. I think that's very important that when producers have access to those trials near them, they get to them. Now, that being said, one of the hardest things in agriculture is we can constantly see what everyone else is doing. We can drive around, we run stop signs looking at our neighbors' fields, and comparison is kind of the thief of joy because it also stops us from progress because no two fields are the same. None of those, what you did and what your neighbor did, is not the same thing. And I catch myself as an agronomist doing that all the time. I'll compare, say, neighbors with the same seeding system. And will this work for them? But you know what? Nothing was the same. Their seed bed wasn't the same. Their nitrogen wasn't the same. Their yield goals weren't the same. Their 1,000 kernel weight, their germination, their seed survivability, their openers, none is the same. So you have to be really careful when we're comparing ourselves to others and not be, I think we need to watch what we hear people saying when somebody throws something on Twitter bashing a variety. We need to realize that there were a lot of management decisions that got producers to that place too that don't tell the whole story. So there's a lot of information that we have to take with a grain of salt, and if somebody goes about there, at least make it entertaining.
Sure.
No, that's great. What about you, Breanna? What are some of the resources or places you go to look?
Yeah, in the past, I definitely was a big fan of Seed Manitoba Guide. Yeah, of course, Manitoba Canola growers put out a great guide here, variety selection. So especially if you're kind of looking at what are, the new yield pushing potential varieties are coming. I always enjoyed, the company specific DST sites. There's lots of great options that could be nice and close to your home area, your home farm. So those resources were great to lean onto, going onto their website, picking a trial that was near your farm. And it gives you a similar feel, maybe with a similar soil type, similar-ish weather. I mean, things change a half a mile away. We have to take everything with a grain of salt. It varies so much, but those always kind of gave us a good idea of how some varieties you're comparing to another in similar situations, and everything else being the same in that trial. So yeah, and of course just like to get out and see those demos as often as possible. From the retailer side, we enjoyed, sometimes we enjoy quitting in the trials, depending if the season went late and it was wet and we were floating canola, maybe not so much, but yeah, it's nice to see it, to walk in, to see the differences from one variety to the next, because every farm has the different needs. So yeah.
Yeah, and Brunel, you mentioned on-farm replication, but anything else as well to add?
It's always fun to put in a trial, but it's harvest that's always the challenge. For us, we do a lot of on-farm research, but we also have a benchmarking program, so we do a lot of comparisons between our growers, between fields, between years. It's interesting when you can start to look at, what the market share of the different varieties are, what characteristics, or if there's any trends in soil types, or how they react in different growing environments, but also how they compare against one another, and what is the range that these canolas are yielding, or there's some that tend to be more consistent than others. But other than that, just to echo the Seed Manitoba guide, this guide from MCGA, we rely a lot on the North NDSU being so close to the border. In the south there in Manitoba, there's a lot of resources that they put out too, which are also this guide that, the more independent trials we have, the better, the more data.
Yeah, so we talked about traits, we talked about some resources. So we're going to kind of move into talking just about labeling, there's a lot of different traits with varieties. How are you finding the current labeling systems across different seed companies for the traits such as pod shatter, maturity, and disease resistance, and what are kind of the major challenges or benefits with them, and when you just look at making some of those variety choices. So I'll kind of open, maybe I'll go to Brunel, go back, do a bit of a pattern here, I see.
I think for the most part it's pretty good. Some's a little bit more standardization would be, or more consistency if we could agree on the same ratings, but as long as we know kind of what they are, how to interpret the data, then we can make some sense of it.
Yeah, I too, we're at a good start. I definitely think there's room for improvement on the consistency side of things. Personally, in the canola world, I spent a lot of time working on disease labeling, and even black leg disease labeling is a bit of a sore spot for me right now. We have some tools in the toolbox, but they're just not every company is labeling and sharing what their races are. I mean, it's not quite as simple as that, but it would be nice if we were going to some of this with the full picture. So I definitely think there's room to improve and to see some of our seed companies be just a little more open with that label. But and then as far as pod shatter, maturity, different things like that, we have some good labeling, but it's just from one company to another it does vary. So some consistency across the board would be great. But
We'll look for you, Karen.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to either of them. Would just be better standardization, because right now you have to basically know every line within itself to gain an understanding of what you're getting.
And so there's a poll up right now on Slido as well, and it's asking what canola trait do you think it is most important for there to be an industry-wide standard labeling system for? So is it blackleg, gracelane, cover, pod shatter, maturity, lodging, CRISPR, Tinea? So lots of options there. So you kind of talked about it, and maybe I'll just ask a bit more specifically towards pod shatter and disease. But is access, you mentioned the variety guide here, with access to, I guess, kind of more independent variety data, is that going to be helpful to fill in some of this gap, just with labeling? Do you see that as a helpful addition?
yes, just gonna jump in there. Sorry. So I do think it's very helpful. It helps kind of give us that again an independent view. It's helping us kind of maybe not rank, but compare varieties aside from what company has put them in. Just be able to bring one to the next. I also think it does help add a little bit of pressure to the companies to get on board, get vocal with things like our blackleg labeling. I think that helps put a little bit of pressure because they want to be in charge of the information that's out there. They don't want it necessarily coming from outside of their camp. So I think if there is independent trials and research being done that's just third party, I think that kind of helps push the needle a little bit on the political side of things as well. So, but I think it definitely is very beneficial for the grower to keep up with these independent trials.
Okay, so sorry, go ahead, Karen.
No, I totally agree with that, and I love the trials. The problem with a lot of these trials is you don't treat the varieties fairly. So if you have, 5 different varieties with different maturity dates, they all get sprayed at the same time, or different pod shatter, right? You'd be in there earlier if that was on a field by field basis. So these trials are really good to look, see, and touch during the growing season, but a lot of the time, I don't feel like the thoroughness is there at yield because guys are so busy and can't treat those trials as if they were a field on their own. Does that make sense? So I think that's a big challenge that the industry has to work through too.
Absolutely.
Like one of the biggest pet peeves that I have is when I look at some of the in-trial data put out by industry. So you'll open a seed guide, one variety will be 105% of a check in such a trial. You turn the page and the next variety is 103% of the check of a different trial. So it's hard to make consistent comparisons between these things. That's where I think the independents I prefer them because it's there's more consistency on that way. They're comparing to the same checks, to the same this, that. So it's just having more clarity and being able to paint a better picture of how these varieties are performing against each other across different lines especially.
For sure. So we'll kind of go into a bit of a wish list for the future, maybe. Thinking about, you mentioned a lot of things for farmers in your area, etc. We've looked at, different traits here as well, and you have the results from the Slido questions going up. So Brunel be really clear kind of winner here as well. But when you think about a wish list for the farmers you're working with in either your area or Manitoba, what's a single improvement in Canola varieties compared to what's on the market today that you would like to see, or would make the biggest difference for farmers you would with? We'll go maybe about Karen Hick first.
So we've had the opportunity to grow some amazing high yielding crops in the parkland, and last year, the last couple of years, we has penciled out over canola. And I think the big reasons for that is blackleg and verticillium. The top growers in our area, they're all doing very consistent and similar things. They're matching their nutrients to their yield goals. They're slowly building their phosphates in an economical way. They're making sure their fields are keen. They're addressing flea beetles. They are using something for blackleg at the proper timing, be it first pass herbicide or the flea beetle pass. They are doing a second pass herbicide if necessary, and they're using fungicide if the environmental conditions dictate that we need to, and the crop looks amazing. These guys are doing everything they can, and there has not been reading we had with growers this winter that they feel that they are maintaining their canola yields. We're slipping. And I feel that, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, soil testing as much as we do, you have the opportunity to see a lot of stubble, and that tells a tale of what happened, and you could see it coming. And it wasn't necessarily like you'd see a stubble field and you'd go in the grower and say, what did this yield? What are you talking about? It yielded 58. But you could see that it was infected. It just infected at such a late time. It didn't take away yield. And I think those bites are getting bigger. Even though we had lots of environmental challenges last year, I still think we lost a lot of yield to disease, and that's the direction we're going to keep going. So the seed companies need to move the needle on their disease resistance, because we are doing, and the farmers are doing everything they can. And I feel like we are out of options right now if we want to keep moving forward. And farmers have a big economical goal. The cost of production is high. They eat the bushels, and the Canola Council has a lofty goal in terms of tons they want to put out. If we are going to do this, that is the biggest thing that needs to get addressed, in my opinion.
Thank you, Karen. Breanna, what about you? What is your wish list? Your one item,
My one item was verticillium. Very much, I'm a broken record right now, and I'm echoing so much of Karen's thoughts. It has been a silent yield robber, I believe, for a number of years. Our growers are doing so many things right, everything right, and it's just what we're getting off the combine is not maybe matching what we expected from the entire growing season. Things looked great. We had a great stand, a great canopy, lots of pods. It flowered for a while. Why did we yield 20 bushels, 15 bushels, even 10 bushels less than expected? And I just believe that verticillium was, starting to creep in and infect a little earlier every year. Not to say every year, sorry, but depending on the conditions. We are running into some hot and dry weather, it seems, which is a verticillium hot spot for us. So I just feel that is something that is slowly been just taking away from that yield potential. Our genetics are getting better. In every way, we should be having better, more consistent variety or yields, and we just haven't been there. So it's not to say it's not coming. We don't unfortunately have that resistance right now. Lots of research dollars and time being spent to try and find that, but it's going to take some time. I just want that wish list to be, as soon as possible. It would be nice to have that available for farmers. So, very slow. Please and thank you.
How about for you, Brunel?
Same thing. Verticillium definitely on the wish list of getting a better understanding for. So not only which varieties, if there is any kind of natural resistance between the varieties that we can use or choose specific varieties to help fight verticillium, but also having a better understanding of it. In our area, it was first noticed about 3 years ago. Last year we didn't really, or 2023 we didn't really see it, but then it was back again in 2024, and you could see it at, like this Karen and Breanna mentioned, you could see it in the stubble, you could see it. It seems to, for us, it seems to go hand in hand with black leg, where like this year, every sample we sent away came back 100% verticillium and black leg infected. So it's definitely something as an industry, it would be nice to get a better understanding of how do we best, what management practices can farmers adopt to protect against this yield. But to echo Breanna, and 5-10 bushels off the top seems to be what we're missing when we have that verticillium work. You can see it in the stubble, half the plant seems to shut down prematurely, and yeah, all the farmers the same comment. It seems like there should have been an extra 5 or 10 bushels there that we didn't realize.
Yes, so thank you so much. So we have had a lot of great audience questions come in, and just a reminder, the Slido is up, or was up, and will be up again, if you want to put up a question. So we're going to move to some audience questions here. AE has been following them, and so I'll hand that over to her.
Thanks. So yeah, we do luckily have some good time to tackle some of your questions. If you have other questions that come up, you can scan the QR code and fill them on Slido. We also, once we get through some of these, will be able to probably have some time to take some of the report. So the first question that had the most interest from the audience today is really a question: do you believe that variety performance is going backwards? So for example, 200 series has been outperformed, or did outperform 300 on a lot of farms, but 200 is not available right now. So in your experience, is it a variety performance, or is there bigger challenges that are coming into play now that we didn't have when some of those older varieties were already available? So whoever wants to tackle.
Yeah, I can start us off there. It's hard to know for sure. I do think we are coming, verticillium is coming to a head. Black leg has become another big issue across the berries that we hadn't been facing, as much of 5 years ago even. So I think there are a lot more other stressors that are playing into it. I don't know that we can necessarily blame on the variety. I know once we have a variety we love and it gets phased out, it's extra difficult to leave that behind, but I don't think we can point to necessarily the series, but my personal opinion anyways. You're in the middle.
I would echo some of that too, and like there is definitely some tried and true varieties that farmers are comfortable with, that they love and enjoy. But canola varieties can vary so much from one field to the next, from one year to the next, that it's harder to pinpoint. I think we could have some varieties in a good year that perform really, really well, and then the next year it's on a different field and it doesn't do what it did the year before. So it can be hard to judge. I think to look at these newer varieties, to say that they're underperforming, I don't think that we've seen that in our data or in our experience, but it's more the familiarity, but it's always changing and we have to keep changing. So.
And then to have Karen.
I guess I just would need more information about that question. Like, was that 200 and 300 series split down the same field at the same time, seeded the same day, at the same seeded conditions? Because that's what the fair comparison is.
Yeah, for sure. And actually this question kind of builds on this. So in your experience, thinking about information that farmers have to support their variety decisions, so companies are tending to choose fields that are high performing for their DSTs or some of their strip trials to showcase their varieties. How do you have the conversation with farmers to caution in terms of adopting based on data and translating some of those results into how performance will perform on farmer-specific fields?
Well, I guess
in my biased opinion, I'd be starting from the ground up, right? Because If I go to a DST and the average is 6 to 5, and I want a 7.5% organic matter soil, and my customer is going to a 3.5% organic matter soil, and it's going to take a lot more nitrogen, it's going to take, where is this going, right? You need to know what that customer's ground looks like versus where that trial is and all the challenges that go with that. Does that make sense? I'm being very broad, but I would be like digging down to the ground.
It's probably okay. So just going back to farmers' fields specifically, so taking that information, a little bit of a grain of salt, bringing it back and looking on farms as well. Breanna, anything to add to that? Is that coming on up?
Let's see, the more sources of data.
Your mic's going to get easy.
Yeah. More sources of data. Sir. The more sources of data we look at, the better that we can paint a picture, the better that we can have an idea of where to go. And, for us, it's been benchmarking, being able to compare all of the farmers' fields, looking at 50 to 100 to 200 fields of canola, trying to tease out some of those differences that we might see. Okay, there might be differences in rainfall data or organic matter or fertility practices, but being able to look at some of those general trends, hopefully with more data, we can kind of tease or overcome some of those shortcomings. But everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. And there's no better experience than growing things on your farm and doing testing on your farm with your equipment.
For sure. So this is a little bit out of the variety choice, but there's a lot of questions focused on verticillium, as expected, because farmers are dealing with it more, or have seen it more in the past years than they have. So in your experience, or in the farmer on the ground, kind of amalgamating a couple questions here. Have you seen anything in particular that you think is causing or increasing in verticillium occurrence in terms of agronomy practices? And then have you noticed significant differences between varieties in terms of verticillium? So a little variety specific in there, but also just kind of what you're seeing in terms of, I know it's all going to be anecdotal at this point, because we don't have a ton of our data on this, but if you have anything to share, I think that'd be valuable, just because there is so much questions on that right now.
I can start into it. I'm, cautiously sharing. So I do work with the Canola Council of Canada. My role is in verticillium. I'm covering the verticillium portfolio right now. So a lot of this is we're still just trying to understand verticillium from the ground up. There's a lot of questions still. So it's nothing is necessarily cut and dry. As we see that an infected plant is full of microsclerotia, top to bottom, bottom to top, I guess, more that direction. Our practices have been going into more of a direction, we straight cut a lot of our canola. So there's a lot of questions about, by leaving it, late into the year, letting that plant fully, fully mature and potentially fully covered in microsclerotia, and then we're straight cutting it and having chaff blow up the back of the combine in the wind. That can help speed up the spread of microsclerotia, because it appears, to be everywhere. Verticillium is everywhere. We have fields that haven't seen canola in 5 years, 7 years. Might have a nice and long rotation, and we still see verticillium issues in. So I do, I wonder about the harvest management practices, and there's something there. So these are things we're focusing on. We do have a verticillium steering committee with, some head of our life science companies, I guess, our provincial specialists, our researchers. They're all kind of helping us to form some best management practices, and that's something we're going to try and work on this winter. Is there something a direction we can point you for that harvest management? But yeah, we're just, unfortunately, the hot and dry cycle we saw this year, especially lots of rain, lots of moisture up front. We had lots of soil activity, and then things went hot and dry. The caps turned off, so the plant was stressed. Verticillium really came in early. So I know if the weather conditions are adding to that, whereas past couple years, maybe we weren't seeing it quite as bad as this past season. yeah, overall we have a lot of questions. We're not, not out there making any confident statements yet on what's really driving the needle for verticillium infection. I still think too early to say, some varieties are handling it better than others. There's definitely some, splitting fields and stuff. You might find out some slight differences, but at this point in time, we're not into that quite yet. So. Yeah, sorry, lots of questions, but lots of research being done. In the next couple of years, hopefully we'll have some better answers here. Okay, Brunel, care to do that?
For us, Brunel's For us, I think that the biggest thing that we notice, it seems to be driven a lot by weather, and there seems to be, this is anecdotal, but whenever we see verticillium, we always see blackleg as well. So does one lead to more does an early infection of blackleg somehow cause verticillium to set in because it opens up the plant or it makes it more susceptible? Hard to say that there's a tie, but to say that we've noticed different varieties or different fields. We're in an area that grows canola every 4 years, typically in a rotation, because we have lots of corn, soybeans, and pulses, so it's not that we're pushing rotations a whole lot, but it's not something that I can say that we've noticed that follows a heavier rotation of canola or specific variety.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen a variety where I can say, this is better for verticillium. I think it's just the environmental conditions and when the stress hits that plant.
Yeah, so again, verticillium, a lot more questions than answers right now. I think everyone's kind of a lot of the same questions. I want to just put a quick plug in. We do have a talk tomorrow. Actually, Justine is doing a talk purely on verticillium. So if you'd like to come back and hear a little bit more in-depth verticillium talk, there is that tomorrow as well. And then just highlighting that MCGA, as well as a lot of the other coolers across the province, there's currently a lot of research dollars in verticillium. It's just those projects are typically 3 to 5 year projects, so still waiting. We don't have some of those hard results for those yet. So another question that came up is looking at flea beetle, questions around flea beetle resistance of varieties, which I know this is a panel of agronomists. I think Tyler Wist did present earlier this morning talking about Canada looking at breeding hairy canola for flea beetle resistance. But in terms of this panel, I just wanted to get your thoughts in terms of if or how you're using variety selection to help with flea beetle management. Whether it be maturity or types of varieties or anything like that. If you have anything to share.
The early season vigor is my main fight. I mean, obviously you're seeing treatments, but if your canola has get up and go, that it can get to that 4-leaf stage and get tossed the flea beetles as quick as possible. That's what I would lean to in terms of variety, what I want for a variety against flea beetles.
And then for how you're choosing a variety of herbal season vigor, not something that's standardized, labeled. What are you using? Is it just experience in terms of that decision?
A lot of the times, yes. What I'm seeing across all the acres we cover, what the other agronomists are seeing, yeah. That's not very measurable. I'm sorry.
No, that's not.
For us, I think biggest thing would be in picking a variety, but looking specifically at flea beetles, is there are certain seed treatments that are better on flea beetles than others that are only available on certain varieties. So that is one case where we would, where that would influence which variety we pick. But then also seeding dates, I guess. A lot of farmers are choosing to plant their canola later, which gives us flexibility to choose an earlier mature, or a necessity maybe to choose an earlier maturing variety with a later planting date. But generally our growing season is long enough that you can still grow most varieties with what we would consider late.
For sure. So that kind of covers the Slido questions. With that, we do have a couple mics that are kicking around. So Kendall has one there, and there's one on this side. So if we have any questions from the floor, for anyone that didn't want to put their questions on Slido, now would be the time. Often? Sure. So with that, do you guys have anything else you want to share?
just on the subject of flea beetles, we had a farm this year that had 2 fields of canola, one across the road from each other. They were both wheat stubble, they were both the same variety, seed lot, seeding date, seeding equipment, seeding depth, like whatever we could be the same was the same. But we had one field that was getting ravaged, the canola was getting ravaged as it was coming out of the ground, and right across the road, and this is just a dirt road, like no ditches even, we're just 30 feet separation. The other field, which had the same variety, same seeded and the same everything, barely a bite. So we scratched our heads and said, what is going on here? And what I think it ended up happening is we had a lot of canola volunteers on the one field because of a different management history. So I think what happened, these canola volunteers took off early in the spring ahead of the crop, and that's what attracted all of the flea beetles to that particular field where they were just chewing the canola as it was coming out of the ground. So if you've got a field that has a lot of heavy canola volunteers, those I think are ones that really, or heavy trash. The same thing goes for corn trash versus other stubbles. They tend to overwinter where there's a lot of trash. Those are the fields typically that we have our flea beetle problems on. So things to consider that early on. If you know you're going to have canola volunteers probably, or you do see them, you know, bank on there being more flea beetles pressure here. But it was an eye-opener for us to see with the one side of the road versus the other. I'd never seen that in my 20 years.
For sure. So if there's any questions from the floor, just throw up your hand and someone will bring you a mic. If not, Karen or Breanna, was there anything else that you would want to touch on that we didn't ask directly in terms of variety selection or considerations when we dealing with growers and talking to growers?
One more point I'm just going to make to Brunel's point about the volunteer canola and sweet beetles. When you're seeding, really watch your conditions when you're seeding, because that's going to tell the tale on how soon you have to get in there. Do you have a flea beetle problem? We had a grower, he seeded a few years ago and it was so windy, and he opened those fields up and left the seed in very minimal moisture, so he had very uneven germination. He said, well, if I would have known that would have happened, I wouldn't have seeded that day. And he probably still would have seeded, but likewise, if you're going in and you're mudding your crop in, you're stressing, know that what your seeding conditions are. I know you can't stop, you gotta go, but know that that's probably the first place you're going to need to be back with the sprayer when there is a flea beetle infestation. So just things like that to keep in mind when you're putting the crop in.
For sure.
Yeah, just closing remarks for me, I guess. Once again, every farm is unique. We all have our things that are maybe problems in certain fields, certain areas. Just really try to identify what our limiting factors are, what our main concerns are year and addressing those. It's great to know what's new and what's popular in the industry, but it's also good to find the right fit for your farm. So just lean on your resources, use your agronomists, use your seed Manitoba layer, NCGA guides, ask lots of questions, attend events like this. You know, you hear a lot from your fellow growers or your fellow agronomists. Come to scenes where Celine talk tomorrow because she'll have better answers than I. But definitely just get out there and learn as much as you can to address those unique problems we have. So that's all of that.
Oh, that's great. So when we're tense for any questions from the floor. Okay. So with that, if everyone can join me in thanking our panelists today for not hearing the winner, for all the time, for